A and S. I imagine Jennifer Ho gently setting porcelain bowls on a sun-bathed countertop. Each is filled with a wide collection of dried tea leaves, herbs, and spices, a delicious tapestry of color, shape, and smell. To her right rests a stack of small burlap bags. She has written an eclectic litany of names pulled from the hundreds, if not thousands, of people fortunate enough to have crossed her path in her tenure at CU Boulder. She scans the contours of a name, dear Anders, that could even be yours. She picks a distinct blend of tea made specifically with that one and only in mind. And sometime soon, she offers it at the exact moment when such warmth is needed. For others, we might call it luck, or chance, or fortune. For Jennifer, it's the way she walks through a day.
Talk about these things accurately is a problem.
That's Dr. Jennifer Ho. She's an ethnic studies professor at CU Boulder.
I can't imagine the University of Colorado Boulder existing without Jennifer's persistent, tireless vision of a just and equitable nation. A professor of ethnic studies and the director of CU Boulder's Center for the Humanities and the Arts, Jennifer is a creative, scholarly force whose work focuses on anti-Asian racism, dialogue, and the lived experience of underrepresented folks within the academy. All the fancy people, including NPR, CNN, and the Wall Street Journal, have sought her expertise, and her coming memoir on navigating her cancer diagnosis is on my list of I will read this before you books. At her center, Jennifer is a confident advocate who is not afraid of hot water. But it's because she knows it's the necessary ingredient to release our best flavor. On the Ampersand, we call this bringing together of the impossible the alchemy of anding. Together, we'll hear stories of humans who imagine and create by colliding their interests. Rather than thinking of and as a simple conjunction in that conjunction-junction kind of way, we will hear stories of people who see and as a verb, a way to speak the beautiful when you intentionally let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. As St. Mary Oliver asks, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Oh, I love this question. When I'm mothering, creating, and collaborating, it reminds me to replace a singular idea of what I think I should become with a full sensory verb about experiencing. I'm Erika Randall, and this is Jennifer Ho on the Ampersand.
I can totally tell you about Jacqueline Hope is the pen name that I assumed I would have. The nom de plume. I don't know if I had the word pseudonym at my fingertips at the age of 11 or 12. And I can't remember. Was I 11? Was I 12? Was I 13? And it doesn't matter, right? My guess is probably around 11 or 12. And I wanted to be a creative writer. I wanted to either be a creative writer or a lawyer, right? Those are the two kind of when you grow up, what do you want to be in life?
Lies or facts? Lies or facts?
Exactly. Exactly, right? I wanted to be in
poetry or facts.
And I was a voracious reader, and I was reading all sorts of things and really, really wonderful things,
Yeah,
you know?
Like what?
Like Charlotte's Web, and there was this really wonderful series by Susan Cooper, who's a British writer, called The Darkest Rising. I was really into fantasy, kind of sci-fi, but I really read voraciously across multiple genres. But, I also read the classics, I read all of Jane Austen, the Brontes. I fell in love with John Steinbeck. But, so I was a voracious reader. I knew I wanted to be a novelist, but everything I was reading, which was fantastic stuff, was written by white people, largely white men. Mm-hmm. And so it didn't even, sometimes when you don't know what's possible and you just see what's in front of you and you think, okay, that's the way life is, right? Didn't see a whole lot of same-sex couples, and so just assumed men and women were the ones that got married, yep. Right? And so similarly, didn't see anyone publishing who wasn't white, and so I just thought, okay, people who publish have white-sounding names. I was exposed to a little bit of African-American literature, so, but still, not a Chinese-sounding name, not an Asian-sounding name, and certainly not about any Asian experiences. And so I thought, in order for me to be published, I would need a white-sounding name, or at least not a Chinese-sounding name. And so I think wanted part of my name. And I have an easy last name to fit into other words. And so I thought Hope, it's also positive. And then Jacqueline.
Oh, Jacqueline. I'm sorry. I was pronouncing it wrong.
Jacqueline sounded, it sounded cosmopolitan, right? It sounded like fancy.
Oh, yeah. Nails done. Clicking on that typewriter.
Yeah. Jacqueline's like a serious writer. And so I would imagine where books that Jacqueline Hope would fit into the library because, again, grew up like a working class, middle class girl, and we used the public library all the time. And so I went to the public library stacks and I traced my fingers at the H's and I got to H-O and then I went past that to where H-O-P-E was. And I would think one day my books would be here, right? One day Jacqueline Hope would write a book and it would be here. And I wish I could hug my 12-year-old self and say, one day you might have a book, but it might be it's going to be your name.
It's going to be your name.
Right. You don't have to invent this whole other persona to get published. Like who you are is good enough.
Yeah. Was that amazing the first time you held
oh my gosh.
your book?
Oh yeah. It seemed, I remember when I finished my dissertation and a friend of mine, like who defended around the same time, and we said, I know this is going to sound funny, but we said, we can take it to the grave. We can put doctor in front of our name. And that was, it was a huge sense of accomplishment because Erika was so hard for me. And there were so many moments when I thought it would just never happen.
And you were writing, can you say your title of your dissertation?
Yeah, it was Consumption and Identity in Asian American Coming of Age Novels.
Yeah. And so this notion of, consumption and identity and coming of age novels, and then talking about things you love. This notion of language, which you love.
Yes.
Food.
Oh, yeah.
Identity.
Oh, yeah.
Identities.
Yeah.
Plural. Did it take a minute for you to focus up on this topic, which you now feel like is like the campfire of your life that you gather around from so many different angles? Or how did it come to you?
So food and cooking is the path not taken for me. I applied to PhD programs, but there was a moment when I wasn't sure if I was going to apply to PhD programs or to Culinary Academy. So Culinary Academy was always the backup plan.
Really?
Oh, yeah. But I think I figured, and this is also naive, I think I thought that applying to a Culinary Academy was doable. That, in other words, I could get into a Culinary Academy. Whereas applying to a PhD program seemed like a reach. And I think my thought process at the time was, let me apply to PhD programs, and then if I don't get in...
Let's go for the impossible.
Yeah, go for the impossible first, and then, if it doesn't happen, I'll apply to Culinary Academy. And yeah, so in fact, I still think about that. I still think about, I really would love to take more courses on knife skills and how to make sauces and,
And so here's the food thing. Here you're applying. So when you were applying, though, you didn't necessarily know that you were going to land in a world that could get you to think with all of these ideas. Or did you? Had you always been someone who thought with multiple ideas at once and then imagined how they spoke forward identities?
I love this persona that you have of me.
Come on. I'm not just talking about Jacqueline, but why I crush out on you so hard is because you have this capacity to be so human in moments where we need it. We being the communities that I know you as a part of, we being just humans right now on the earth. How do you show up human, compassionate, and thinking critically? And really not afraid to be direct when there's something that's going on. So I don't think that that's just a persona. I think that's, what am I missing? What part's made up? Okay, what part is persona?
So I'm going to say something which I realize is going to sound either self-deprecating or overly humbling, and I don't mean it to be.
Okay.
So I think I do have skills, I do have strengths, but I also am not as smart as I think people give me credit for. I know. I mean, there's no way for me to say that, and then
I'm doing that side eye.
No, I know, and I really am not. I don't mean it in the way that I meant it in the past. Like in the past, I would say that all the time because I had a deep-seated insecurity of, especially being in a literature department in a graduate program where, I remember the first time I saw Edward Said, right, post-colonial theorist extraordinaire. I saw his name. And I, in my head, pronounced it as Edward Said because his last name is S-A-I-D, and in English, you pronounce it as Said. And then I got into a graduate seminar and they were talking about Edward Said. And I quickly figured out that they were the same person that I knew as Edward Said was Edward Said, the post-colonial critic who had written Orientalism. And I remember just being so mortified. Like, thank God.
I didn't speak out loud.
Yes. And then the following year, someone did say it, right? Someone said Edward Said, a first-year graduate student, and then everyone made fun of that person.
But you didn't.
I didn't.
This is what I don't know that smart's the right word because, I'm not that smart. You are that superhuman. You do hold the things that, like, ooh, Said, who cares? But you hold the story of the person who didn't. You hold the story of your shame and humility and the learning in the moment. And then you hold the story of the person who didn't say it right. And then you share that forward. And that is its own kind of genius, the capacity to both recognize one's own moment and then see it in another and then help.
So here's where I think if I have a superpower, this is my superpower. Okay, my superpower is I think I'm pretty good at being accurate in my assessment of myself, and I try and be accurate in my assessment of others. Like, my assessment of others is obviously off because there's no way for me to really know anyone other than myself. But I am pretty good at kind of figuring out, like, here are my strengths, here are my weaknesses, and I try and keep myself in check. And there are actually real reasons for this. The reason I try and keep myself in check is that there is a part of me, and maybe it's unnamed, but there's a part of me that craves the things that are not so nice, right? Craves the power. Like, I'll give you an example. So I direct the Center for Humanities and the Arts. And there were, prior to me becoming director, there was no term limits to the CHA director, right? The CHA director could be the CHA director indefinitely. I mean, of course, there are reappointments, things like that. And I had a conversation with Scott Adler about this because honestly, I love doing this job. And there's a part of me that could easily see myself retiring in the position of CHA director as long as everyone thought it was okay. Mm-hmm. But that's a terrible idea.
We vote yes.
Oh, no.
I know. I was actually a part of the term limits thing.
Yes.
I know.
Term limits make sense.
I know.
They make sense.
I know.
And a friend of mine actually said, why would you do that? Why would you shoot yourself in the foot? And I said, because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. Yeah. And because I can't trust myself enough when I'm nearing the end of my term to think that I'm going to do it then. So I got to do it now. And I got to hold myself accountable because I am the steward of the CHA and the CHA is not me. Yeah. And that is so important to me.
So this ties us to the fact that when I think about your candor and I think about your directness and the way that you hold space, you do that with hard things, systemic racism, breast cancer. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No Fucking Pink Ribbons was the name of your blog, and I've heard you speak about it in other podcasts. But why that title?
It was a phrase that went through my head when I was getting a second mammogram. So I got a first mammogram and I just sort of assumed that, I had, cystic breasts and it was going to be no big deal because I was 40, right? And who gets breast cancer at 40? And, and then the radiologist came and then he was like literally palpating my left breast for what seemed like hours and was probably only about 15 minutes. But and then he was like, yeah, I think you need to go, I think there's something, I think you need to get a biopsy. And UNC Hospital wouldn't, even though I had just had a screening done, they insisted that they had to do their own mammogram, right? So I had to do it again. And on the way to the room, we passed by pink ribbon paraphernalia everywhere. And I remember seeing these pink ribbons and I just instantly in my head thought, if this is cancer, I'm never wearing a fucking pink ribbon, right? And I literally said that out loud. And which also, you have to understand in the context of the U.S. South, was definitely not the thing to say. So the nurse, very nice.
You said it out loud.
I said it out. I didn't realize I was saying it out loud, but I said, because it was in my head, but I think I was just, stressed. And so I said it out loud, kind of under my breath. And she turned around, she said, what did you say? And then I just was like, I've sworn in front of this nice white lady. And I just said, look, if it turns out that I have cancer, I'm never wearing one of those fucking things. I think this goes to, I just showed up as who I was because that's how I was feeling. And lucky for me, she laughed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I have offended nice white Southern ladies before.
Yeah. I can't imagine. And so your journey with breast cancer is something you wrote about. You've talked about it. You are now in remission.
I am.
How many years? It's been
13.
13.
13 years, yeah.
I love this. I love 13 years. And I also know from listening to you talk about it on the other podcast that you got this diagnosis at a really potent time in your life. And I've been thinking about this alignment in my own life when something just devastating is coming at the moment of something of so much joy. And something you touched on was also, I got to say it, vanity. And you said the dress. You talked so much about your dress because you got your diagnosis right a month before your wedding.
Yes.
Yeah, and I lost my mom the week before mine. And I thought, and still, I think the thing I've written most since my mother's death that really feels so true and so off was about the dress, about how I looked in my dress after losing my mother. And you holding on chemo and surgeries and all the things until after the wedding. So because you also were holding about the dress because you were trying to get pregnant. So there's like so much happening in one moment.
Yeah.
And the fact that you were even willing to mention that, this is a day you're going to have pictures of. And so aren't we allowed to be a little vain, but not too vain, as Barbie would tell us?
Yeah, I think, it's funny. I guess I did think about it as vanity, and I guess it is vanity, but I think in another way.
Give me another word, because it's really eating me away from myself.
Yeah, I think we all just want to feel good about ourselves. And there is no way, especially now that I've been through chemo, there's no way that I would have been able to feel good about myself being on chemo. And, my hair, once you start chemo, especially the kind of chemo I had, your hair starts falling out. And that was the other thing, right? I didn't want my hair to be, I didn't want to worry about my hair falling out. I didn't want to worry about and I still have the scar from my port, the port scar showing.
What did your dress look like?
It was a chocolate brown dress, satin, that I got at Ross for $75.
Yes, you did.
It was such a good bargain.
It was such a good bargain. But also you didn't want the photos of... you want photos of the moment of the marriage.
I wanted, and it was something that colored the day. Yeah. It was something that, but I also think in some ways, and I suppose I'm going to sound a little bit cliched at this point, but it was life, right? Life is...
That's how I felt.
It's both, right? It is life and it's death. It is things that are joyous and it is moments of panic about, am I going to be around next year? Right. It's uncertainty. And it's also super important, I think, for that reason that we try and experience the joy when we can. I've been thinking a lot about joy because I think there's so many hard things going on. And I think especially for people who care about changing the world, whether that's through climate change activism or, ending racism or the myriad attacks on LGBTQ plus people going on. And there's a lot of despair. And yet we need the moments when we can dance. We need the music and the food and the joy and to give ourselves space to find that joy and to be in the joy and not second guess ourselves about it. Because I think that's the other thing, like people who want to change the world, like I think oftentimes it feels like so much is at stake. And I also think that the thing that sustains us is going to be the joy.
Yeah, I just had a friend send me a quote that I was actually writing about this morning that said, you haven't been trying to heal so that you can handle trauma. You've been handling trauma so you can heal to feel joy. And that just feels so true, how to get to joy. And especially as folks who are so open and caring to the problems and the pains of the world. And we see them in our students and we want to give them a sustainable way to keep going.
Well, that, and you have children, so you probably have heard this phrase, don't yuck on someone's yum. The idea, I guess the idea is you might like something, like I might love peanut butter and you may hate peanut butter, but like you shouldn't tell me like, oh, that's disgusting, because that's my yum.
Thank you. This happens to me all the time because I like to eat savory foods around breakfast time. And I get from my family, like, you're going to eat curry right now. And I never question their cheese pizza that could be eaten at any time of day. Yeah, don't yuck on my yum.
Don't yuck on my yum.
In every world, in every part of us.
Yeah. I will say, if I'm being really honest, though, We are in challenging times. We are in really challenging times. And so I think not the danger, but there is a way, like I was just, I'm very active on Twitter, and I was just reading on Twitter, Hakeem Jeffrey said, people talk about the polarization of our political climate right now. It's not polarization, it's right-wing extremism. And I think he's right. I try really hard to not just devolve everything into a polarized sense of politics. And I was trained this way, living 17 years in the U.S. South, to be really careful about this. But I think what he said is it's important to be accurate. And so when I think about the Dobbs decision last summer, and I think about the affirmative action decision this summer, and I think about the Colorado website designer who invented a fictitious client so she wouldn't have to do a wedding website when it's not even right. When I think about all of those things, it is right-wing extremism. It is political in an electoral political sense. It's not just that we're not seeing equal. I know people like to say wokeism is like the counterbalance, but it's really not.
Mm-hmm. So when you think about the yucking on someone's yum in that space, there are places we need to call in folks who aren't holding all the information or willing to have a nuanced conversation about impact of their preference, right, of their belief,
right,
of their. Yeah, does that align for you? That there are ways that we can't just say, oh, that's what you think and feel, I'm gonna give you that. No, we have to.
Yeah. I want to live in a world where we can agree on facts. Mm-hmm. So while I may not agree with someone's politics who is a conservative Republican, if we can agree that what happened at the Capitol on January 6th was an insurrection, and then I think we can live in the same plane of reality. I can't deal with people who are going to talk about Q and talk about Hollywood celebrities that are secretly eating babies, or that talk about the deep state and the fakes, or that the Parkland shooting was a false flag and those were crisis actors. I can't. That is a different. I feel, Erika, that we are living in a reality in which people genuinely think that that's the truth.
Right.
And I don't know what to do with that.
How do we hold the fact that the truth is so hard to hold, and that it is so slippery, and that it has from the stories that people bring to a moment, right? How do we who don't agree, mm-hmm, hold the other as a human so we can understand the stories they bring, so maybe together we could get past this?
I don't know. I mean, it does require, you know what I think about too, and I know we're meandering around lots of different things. I think about Dylan Roof, and I think about when he was in the courtroom in South Carolina, in Charleston, and I think about the family members of the Black people slain in a church, and what it took for them to say to him, I forgive you. And I know a lot of people were like, they thought it was like incredible. Like, why would they do that? I understood that. I actually understood that what they were trying to do was for themselves and their loved ones, right? Because they didn't want it to be about him. They want justice. Obviously, they want justice. They want him held accountable. They want an end.
They weren't trying to be neutral.
They were not trying to be neutral. They are very clear about the end of anti-Black racism and the role that white supremacy and the Confederate flag and, and the history and the decades and centuries has played. But I'm not Christian, but I have lots of friends who are Christian, and I think that this is part of their deeply held belief, right? That it's God who will judge Dylan Roof, and that for them to move on, they had to forgive him. And that is one of the most incredible acts of grace and humanity that I've ever witnessed. It really is, because I don't know that I could have done that.
Yeah.
And so seeing another human do that and extend to him the grace that he, I don't want to say doesn't have, but certainly didn't have when he murdered their loved ones. And how wonderful would it be if we could tap into that, right? How wonderful would it be if we could figure out a way to hold that level of grace for someone who has done the unimaginable. And so how do we get there?
How do we get there? That's what I'm thinking with, right? Because it's almost impossible to even talk about some of these things. We have no grace even entering into these conversations. How do we bring it with us?
It's going to be, and I know I'm preaching to the choir. It's going to be art. I really believe that. It's going to be art. And I don't say that to in any way diminish other disciplines, right? Because obviously I am grateful to our many colleagues at CU Boulder who kept us safe during COVID with, shout out to Shelley Miller.
With real science.
Yeah, with real science. And, air, like 1,000%.
Yeah. But
the way to hear each other as humans isn't going to be numbers. It's going to be stories. It's going to be doing what we're doing. It's going to be meeting. And I try, and I'm not good at this, right? But I do try. I do try and hold space in myself for people who I know I disagree with, right? Who I know in a million years I really don't want to be having this conversation with. But that I try and think that they are, to make sure that I keep them human-sized.
But, okay, so you don't think, when the books that you do write, do you find that you bring in the poetry from the novels that you've read? Is your mind working in that way? It's working critically and poetically.
I think everything that I've ever written has something personal in it. So for my dissertation, for example, in my dissertation, when I began chapter 1, I talked about this anecdote, which again is is kind of a very poignant anecdote. And it was going to visit, my family loved Bonanza. We watched Bonanza all the time. It was on syndication, right? We watched Bonanza, right? And we went to Lake Tahoe, and you could go visit the set where it was filmed. And we went on the tour, and there are like these life-size dioramas of all the Bonanza boys and Hop Sing. Hop Sing was the Chinese cook. And so Hop Sing is in the kitchen, and the tour guide cracks some kind of joke talking the way that the Asian American character man who had to play Hop Sing would have talked, right? Which is in this kind of stilted Chinese pidgin, which is, I'm sure, not the way that the actual human spoke. And everyone laughed, and except my dad, and my family, right? And I remember distinctly thinking, they're making fun of my dad. I really remember thinking that, they're making fun of my dad.
How old were you?
Probably 8 or 9.
Okay.
And it was a terrible feeling.
Yeah.
It was a really terrible feeling. And so when I was writing chapter 1 about this novel, which was also about, this Chinese American family and who lived in Oakland, Chinatown, and, a Chinese American dad, I opened with that anecdote about how these stories and these stereotypes linger with you. And so, and I've never really asked my dad. I think I may have asked my dad about it, and he had no memory of it. And I don't think anyone meant to be malicious. I actually don't think they were laughing. I genuinely don't think they were laughing at us. But I think my 9-year-old self wouldn't, somehow picked up that it was about us. It both was and wasn't about us. And that's the difficulty of race and racism, because it is and it isn't. And that it's the ideology of white supremacy that has ingrained these things in us.
When you tell one of your amazing stories, do you pause and ask yourself to tell it in a new way, to see what you can learn from it? This is a thing that Tim and I were in conversation this summer, and he asked me what kind of stories are up for you, and how do we learn with our stories in new ways? And I told a story about my mom, and it was one of my stories. It was a funny story. I knew how to land it. I knew the punchline, but I told it in a different way because I was in a different relationship with my mom. And now the story is exploded. It's all of a sudden there's this camera that used to just have this kind of proscenium lens, and now it's this 360. And I see different things in the memory, whether they're true or not. Again, this is the problem with truth. But the memory holds more for me, or holds different for me now. Do you think about that when you think with your stories that are kind of iconic and seminal and indelible? And can you tell me a story in a new way?
You know what's funny? I have been thinking about this. So I'm going to tell you the red velvet pancake story, and then I will do the meta, what the red velvet pancake story means. So I used to be a faculty mentor for a program called MURAP at UNC Chapel Hill. And I get invited to a brunch with other faculty mentors and staff at this woman's house. And she is a home chef and she cooks all the time. And to be honest, I don't know if she's Southern herself or she's just lived for a long time in North Carolina. And she is making us for the first time red velvet pancakes. And there's about 20 people at this brunch. And so she tells us that this is a new recipe that she's trying out, these red velvet pancakes. She makes them for us. They're good, but they are slightly metallic. So for anyone in the audience who bakes, she's used a little bit too much baking soda. Anyone who's baked, you may have run into this issue before. It's not a big deal. It's easily correctable on a second iteration. So we're eating the pancakes. Everyone is raving about them. And she asks us, what do you think? Is there any, this is a new recipe. She asks us like maybe 3 times. And by the 3rd time, I thought to myself, okay, I think she really wants to know. And I'm like a home cook who experiments with recipes, and I would want to know, right? And so I say to her, these are very good. And I asked her, I said, did you use baking soda or baking powder? She said, I used both. And I said, what were the ratios? And she tells me the ratio. And she used more baking soda than baking powder. And so I said, I think the ratio of the baking powder and baking soda is off because they're slightly metallic. Right? The pancakes are slightly metallic. She thanks me. She didn't seem perturbed. She didn't break
her heart.
It didn't seem like it. It seemed like just having a matter-of-fact conversation, like where I was like, oh, Erika, you've got something in your hair. And you're like, oh, thank you. And then you move on, right? It was like that kind of conversation.
Yep.
Yeah. And so, but everyone else around the table acted like I farted. Right? Like I had made like the hugest faux pas, like they wouldn't look me in the eye. And for me, the red velvet pancake story is all of the ways in which Jennifer Ho doesn't know how to talk to people in the U.S. South, right? And you should not be asking for feedback if you don't want feedback, right? Like, why are you asking for feedback if you don't want feedback? Okay, so I tell this story at a holiday party thinking it's a funny story, right? And there's like, to the group of people I'm with, the small group of people I'm with, there's awkward total silence. Like I farted again, right? And I was like, what's happening, right? Because I've told the story before, like to non-Southerners.
And it plays.
But here's the thing. I told this story to a group of higher ed leaders, okay, when I was the associate director at the Institute of Arts and Humanities. And it fell totally flat. And I was like, okay, something's different. And then I had a friend who was there, and I asked him later, and I was like, yeah, I told that story. He's like, Jennifer, I don't know why you told that story. And I said, what was wrong with telling that story? And he said, you think that story is funny about how people don't understand you being direct. And what people heard is, you are tone deaf and can't read the room and don't know how to interact properly.
See, this is what's so interesting, too, though, about the stories that we tell. And when we really can listen to them, we really can learn from them. And so maybe there's a better story. Maybe there is. Or maybe there's a better, different way to tell the story. Or maybe it's the audience, that it can't just be the same story over and over. Maybe there is something about the audience and how we turn it. But I'm so much more interested in the way the story, when we listen to it, tells us something about ourselves, if we can listen. And the fact that you have such a kind of a radical comfort in telling personal stories tells me that you're willing to listen to them also.
You know what's funny? You know what I think about this story? What I think about now?
Yeah, tell me.
I wanted to be right.
Oh, Dark Jennifer.
Yeah, I wanted to be right. That's, I think, partly why I told the story. Because it was a story, in some ways it wasn't a kind story. I mean, again, my friend wasn't wrong. In some ways, I was trying to say, here's someone who asked for feedback and I gave feedback and everyone acted like I did something wrong and I didn't do anything wrong because I was right.
Yeah, because I was right.
Because I was right. And honestly, Erika, I was right about the metallic taste, right?
But right versus kind, which is what I tell my 7th grader as of today. Do you want to be right or do you want to be kind?
Yeah.
And how do we hold right and facts and truth and kindness? And it takes us back into this idea of grace.
So you know what I could have done? And honestly, that I should have done? I should have followed her back to the kitchen and been alone with her and said, I know you're at, and then contextualized and said, I experiment all the time. And then I should have told her alone, one-on-one. I shouldn't have done it in front of everyone.
Okay, this is a way to world peace.
Yeah. I think, in hindsight, I do think it was a mistake.
Yeah. But that's when we think about the politics of our nation and of our world, what is the container for the conversation? And how do we shape it? And how do we listen with enough compassion to actually pause and not just try to be right?
Yeah. But
to get a better pancake.
Yeah.
Okay, let's hold each other into those spaces where we can say, hey, Randall, I really appreciate what you said, but maybe we could have said it a little differently. Maybe we could have gone to the kitchen for that one. Mm-hmm. Deal? Okay, I'm going to do the quick and dirty.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
I tell people you got to be quick. You don't have to be dirty, but then they are not as fast as they think they're going to be. Are you ready?
I am competitive, so I am ready to be fast.
You grew up in Hayward, California.
Correct.
Your Hayward, California perfect day. You would take people to see this and this and this. Go.
I'd go to the shoreline, and then we would walk, and we would find sandpipers, and I would talk to them about pickleweed.
Oh, that was so fast and so good, and I want to go. Okay, staying in Hayward, can you give me like a snapshot, a postcard from 1970, Hayward? What's on the postcard?
On the postcard is a picture of me and my cousins with our bowl haircuts sitting on the curb eating a popsicle, rocking the 70s plaid.
Yes, the 70s plaid. An unexpectedly delicious food combination, either that you've made or that you've encountered, and you were like, whoa, I had no idea that this and this would go together.
Oh, miso. Like miso and sweet is like the perfect kind of savory, and that just brings out, like especially anything miso with molasses, like a miso molasses cookie. I know. Really. It's
my face right now.
Yeah.
Do you bake that?
I haven't. It's more like I've explored, yeah.
Like there are bakeries that sell it for too much money that we could go and have together.
Yeah, and I've actually thought about like trying to recreate it.
Okay, I want to know. We're going to do that together. Authors who, when you were going down the library lane and your fingers were touching, you were like, oh, I want to be like this one and this one and this one, like in 5th grade. Who are your authors?
Oh, well, Louise May Alcott, like hands down, right?
Joe.
Everyone wants to be Joe.
Everyone wants to be Joe.
Yeah, Louise May Alcott.
And
John Steinbeck. Yeah.
We still like him.
No, I love John Steinbeck. Like the last words of East of Eden, Tim Shell, right? The possibility, he holds humanity in a way that I deeply respect.
I love that. Okay. How you would tease into a story you've never told. So you're just going to be like, or like the punchline. I just want the and there was egg all over my face. Like think of a story, get really specific, and then tell me the last line starting with "and."
And there was blood all over the sofa. You're curious now, right?
Oh, I'm in.
And there was blood all over the sofa.
Okay, we're going to talk. I don't want to give this one to our listeners. I want you to write that story.
Okay.
All right. You have mentees in this world who love you, you have changed so many lives.
Oh.
It's super true. When you send them off into the world, I want you to imagine a blessing that would start with "and" that you would use to send them off to their next.
Am I allowed to swear?
Oh, hell yeah.
So actually there's one thing, and all of my former students know this from the time I was at Boston University to now. There's only one goal I ever have for teaching. And this is the last thing I ever say to my students on the last day of class. When you leave my classroom, don't be an asshole. That's it. That's simple. Don't be an asshole.
That was Jennifer Ho, Director of the Center for the Humanities and the Arts and Professor of Ethnic Studies from the University of Colorado Boulder. For more info on Jennifer Ho, see our show notes or follow her on Twitter. The Ampersand is a production of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Colorado Boulder. It is written and produced by me, Erika Randall, and Tim Grassley. If there are people you'd like us to interview on the Ampersand, do please email us at asinfo@colorado.edu. Our theme music was composed and performed by Nelson Walker, and the episodes are recorded at Interplay Recording in Boulder, Colorado. I'm Erika Randall, and this is the Ampersand.